Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And this is video number 15 in my review and response and refutation of Sam Frost's book, The Parousia of the Son of Man. And I'm taking a look at Mr. Frost's comments on the eschatological passages in Thessalonians. And I have to tell you, as I've said often before, Mr. Frost has virtually invented a brand new eschatology, or I should say a brand new interpretation of the passages in Thessalonians, both 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians. Now, today's video is going to touch almost as an overview. I won't be able to go into in-depth analysis of his comments on each of the passages in 1 Thessalonians, but I do want to hit some highlights to show to you how presuppositional and how misguided Mr. Frost's view of Thessalonians and the eschatology to be found there truly is. First of all, what you need to realize, everything that Mr. Frost says about 1 Thessalonians particularly is based upon his presuppositional interpretation of Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14. In that vision, Daniel said, I saw in the night visions, one like unto the Son of Man, and he came before the Ancient of Days, and the thrones were set, and there were given unto him a kingdom, a dominion, a power, and glory, a kingdom that shall never pass away. Now, Mr. Frost claims that is the ascension of Christ in Acts chapter 1. Now, let me share with you, I once held that view myself. This, to Mr. Frost, is the parousia of Christ that dominates and controls all New Testament eschatology. Well, I would agree with that on one level, okay? Because in the New Testament, the term Son of Man is used over and over and over again. However, Mr. Frost, once again, says that Daniel chapter 7 is the ascension of Christ, and that when we come to passages in 1 Thessalonians that speak of the coming of Christ, his parousia, it's referring to past events primarily. And thus, we should not read these passages in Thessalonians as predictive of a future event, but we should read those passages, we'll notice one here momentarily, as referencing the past ascension of Christ into the presence of the Father, and that he is now hidden from us, but he is present with us as a thief, unseen, unknown, but present, and that his presence before the Father, from there he sends forth the Holy Spirit as a thief in the night, because he is hidden and unseen. Now, here's something that you need to know. And in a remarkable new book entitled A Handbook on the Jewish Roots of the Christian Faith, an author by the name of Stutz makes comment on Daniel chapter 7. And he points out that Daniel chapter 7 and the reference to the Son of Man is used in the New Testament in a variety of ways, basically 3 different ways. Let me read to you from page 158. Jesus adapted the term, quote, the Son of Man, unquote, in a very balanced way, 16 times relating to his earthly ministry. Well, obviously, Mr. Frost does not believe that the term Son of Man in 1 Thessalonians is being used to refer to Jesus' personal earthly ministry. because they're talking about his coming with the saints, etc. Okay? Then, 27 times to refer to Jesus' suffering. Well, again, Mr. Frost does not believe that 1 Thessalonians is talking about the suffering of the Son of Man. But please catch this, as Mr. Stutz, and by the way, Mr. Stutz is not alone. This is essentially, with perhaps a few exceptions, this is essentially the view of N.T. Wright, R.T. France, and a great host of other major scholars. Okay, now watch this. 16 times related to his earthly life, 27 times referring to his suffering, and 26 times referring to his glorification. While Jesus applied the term Son of Man from Daniel 7, 13 and 14 to the various states of his ministry, he applied the vision reported in Daniel 7, 13 and 14, along with Zechariah 12 and 10, exclusively and unambiguously to his return. Matthew 24, 30, Matthew 26, 64, Luke 21, 26 and 27. This observation confirms that Jesus understood himself as the Danielic Son of Man. Well, let's get this before us. Jesus' ascension in Acts chapter 1 was not his coming in glory, it was his departure. It was not his coming in judgment. But Mr. Stutz is absolutely correct to point out that all of the references to the coming of Christ on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, the coming of the Son of Man with the clouds and power and great glory in the New Testament are judgment passages. And look, this is the case in Daniel chapter 7. By the way, I've had up to this point a YouTube debate with Mr. William Vincent. Mr. William Vincent adopted Sam Frost's view of Daniel chapter 7, and he said, I would challenge anybody to debate this issue. Okay, we've had 4 presentations, 2 each. It's now been almost 2 months since I posted my response. Mr. Vincent is 6 weeks overdue in posting his response. I don't know why, he hasn't explained. But the point of fact is, as I point out from the text of Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 7 presents the story of the arrival of 4 kingdoms, the last being Rome. In the days of Rome, the little horn would arise, persecute the saints, the thrones would be set, judgment would be set, the Son of Man would come in judgment of the little horn and destroy him. That is the interpretation of the vision found in Daniel 7:15 and following. Now, since the interpretation of the vision demands that the coming of the Son of Man is the coming of the Son of Man in judgment, and since Acts chapter 1 is not the coming of the Son of Man in judgment of the little horn, then that means that Daniel 7:13 and 14 is not about the ascension. Now, let me illustrate that from Thessalonians. In an absolutely, just in a stunning application. Mr. Frost says on page 41 that 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 13, which reads, so that he may establish your hearts blameless in holiness before our God and Father at the coming of our Lord Jesus with all his saints. And he points out something. The ESV has at and coming, where in and the presence is the actual Greek text itself. And he points out that this is, well, he wants us to say, he wants us to believe, quote, this is not something Paul is waiting for, but something that Paul was praying for them now. The Son of Man, the Lord, is before the Father in his presence, confirming those who believe on his name, speaking their names. For if any man is not ashamed of him, he will not be ashamed of them before the Father, Matthew 10:32. The Parousia of 1 Thessalonians 3:13 of the Son of Man in heaven was a reality, not a future event. He is at the right hand of God. Do you see what Mr. Frost has done? Based on his completely false view of Daniel 7:13 and 14, which is, once again, a judgment scene, not an ascension scene. Please go to my YouTube video, okay, YouTube channel, and look up William Vincent versus Don K. Preston, or Don K. Preston debates William Vincent. Look at that debate. You will see absolute positive proof Daniel 7:13 and 14 is not the ascension. Yet that is the entire basis, the foundation of Mr. Frost denying the future sense of 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 13. Now, what Mr. Frost conveniently omits, just glosses right over it as if it did not exist, and yet this is agreed upon by virtually all commentators. Zechariah 3 and verse 13, which, by the way, I discuss in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings. Now, watch this. 1 Thessalonians 3:13 is a direct quotation of Zechariah chapter 14, verse 5. So let me read verses 1 through 5. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming. Your spoil will be divided in your midst. I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off. Then the Lord will go forth. Now, go forth, okay, and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle. And in that day, what day? The day of the city being destroyed. The day in which the Lord would go forth. His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move toward the north, half of it toward the south. Then you shall flee through my mountain valley, for the mountain valley shall reach to us all. Yes, you shall flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the saints with you. Okay, now wait a minute. 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 13 is a direct citation. And again, scholarship is virtually unanimous in agreement on this. Okay? So whereas Mr. Frost likes to claim that he stands on scholarship, well, I can tell you right now, he's swimming upstream on this one. So we have 1 Thessalonians 3 and verse 13 quoting Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 5. The Lord will come with all of his saints. Mr. Frost says that's already come. But wait a minute. The coming of the Lord with all of his saints in Zechariah 14 is when the Lord would go forth in battle. It is the time in which the city would be taken, the spoil divided, the women ravished. Does Mr. Frost believe the Lord had already gone forth in battle against Jerusalem and destroyed the city, the women ravished? No, he does not. And so Mr. Frost is guilty of the worst sort of hermeneutic. Number one, he ignores the Old Testament source of 1 Thessalonians 3:13. Number two, he ignores the context of the prophetic source of the verse that Paul quotes. And the context of that source is the judgment on Jerusalem. Number three, he builds his interpretation on a false interpretation of Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14, which is, as shown, a judgment context, not the ascension. Every single thing about Mr. Frost's interpretation of 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 is wrong. Fundamentally, hermeneutically, exegetically, and logically, absolutely wrong. But you know what? This barely touches the hem of the garment of Mr. Frost's abuse, and yes, that's what I call it, abuse of the book of Thessalonians. I will give you just a small hint of that abuse when on page 45, in discussing 2 Thessalonians, Mr. Frost says, 2 Thessalonians, written sometime shortly after the first letter, again uses parousia in the same way as we've already seen. You see, he's already distorted the use of parousia by saying it had already happened at the ascension. But we continue. Now watch, please catch the power of this. It is a bit troublesome to see many respected translations give the appearance of the parousia as something to happen in the future. Chapter 1 further illustrates what we have been saying is the correct path. In other words, Mr. Frost says that the translations are wrong to present 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 as an event future to Paul. To say this is stunning, to say this is unprecedented, to say this is incredible is an understatement of unmeasurable magnitude. And we'll talk about that in our next review. In the meantime, be sure to go to my website, DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and look there. And if you would, get the little book, In Flaming Fire. It is an exegesis of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. And you will see there, look, do yourself a favor also, go to BibleGateway.com and look up 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, particularly verse 7, and to see if you can find a single translation, even one, that renders that as a past event. We'll have more to say about this, but see if you can find even one that translates 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 as a past event. Hint and clue. You can't. You can't. Okay. Go to my website, DonKPreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and order the little book, In Flaming Fire. It will set the stage for our exegesis of 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and for our refutation of Mr. Sam Frost's aberrant, unprecedented claims about that text. Be sure to do that. Lord willing, we'll see you next Monday. You have a great weekend.